Okay. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon for everybody who's watching this live or watching the replay. Hi, my name is Vivian Acquah, and welcome to a special edition of Go to Thrive, where we are talking about unlocking team potential insights from team getting things done with others. So today, bear with me. I have a few guests that I need to introduce, so bear with me, please. The first guest is David Allen, and he's an international best-selling author who's widely recognized as the world's leading expert on personal and organizational productivity. Times Magazine called his flagship book, Getting Things Done, the definitive business self-help of the decade. I see Jacinta. Hi, Jacinta, for joining us. I will share your comment pretty soon. And the next guest is Edward. Edward is the co-founder and senior partner of Next Action Associates. He's also a Getting Things Done partner in the UK and Ireland. And he has 25 years of experience in executive coaching, training, and consulting on leadership, productivity, motivation. And he's also the co-author of this book. And of course, my co-host, Mary Jane Roy, who is an advisor, facilitator, presenter, and also my sister in need, building healthy stress and resilience skills and strategies for employee staying power. So again, hi, my name is Vivian Acquah, certified diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. And we are really curious about the new book. So behind David, if you look at the top corner, behind David, you'll see the book that we are going to discuss. It's a book that is a must-have for those who want to boost their team building resilience. Did I miss anything, Mary Jane?
Not a thing, Vivian. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's dive in. So hi, Jacinta, for joining this conversation. And if you have any questions to ask or comments to share, please use the chat form so that you share your comments or your questions. Know that I only will publish constructive comments or questions. So let's dive into the first question, and that is to both of you. How do the principles of getting things done for the individuals translate into team dynamics discussed in the book? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the principles are principles, right? So the nature of a principle is that it's kind of eternal and it's unvariable across different circumstances. So the principles that are true for individuals are also true to a certain extent, at least for teams. And so I would say almost everything in the first books we have used in some form in the book on team because they're principles. And in terms of how that shows up, it shows up very differently for teams than it does for individuals, because individuals can make decisions in their heads and then get on with things, whereas teams, if everybody makes decisions in their heads, they can be often at cross purposes. So those principles need interpretation at a team level. That very often it doesn't need interpretation and clarification at a team level. That doesn't really need to happen for individuals because the individuals just get going. So that would be my take on it. David, because David articulated the individual stuff, he might have another take on that.
No, I'd agree totally with what Ed just said. The thing that we've noticed is that when I could be really clear and highly productive, each one of you could be really clear and highly productive. But when we get together, the complexity goes up exponentially in terms of, now wait a minute, Vivian, is that yours? What role do you have here? And Mary Jane, what are you doing here? These kind of conversations add a lot more richness and complexity to how people apply these principles with each other. So otherwise, same thing Ed said. Yay.
Great. Thank you both. You've kind of sort of answered maybe this next question, but I'm looking maybe for specifics, instances of where it triggered you both to focus on teams. So what inspired you to do that, to focus on team productivity as the next step in the GTD journey? Are there specifics there? Cases?
Yeah, I mean, I think 15 years of working with David and teaching the individual productivity skills led to identifying certain patterns, which, David and I in discussion, we just went, hey, I think there's something that can be done here. And one of the patterns was, very often, because of the nature of the material, it attracts people who are already quite productive and want to be more productive. The people who are not doing much don't really care, but the people who are already productive and want to be more productive, they're drawn in. So we end up teaching really smart and motivated people, and we give them good skills. And 15 years in, I began to notice that very often I was sending these people back into teams that really didn't function. And it wasn't a question of, if we just raise the individual skills on the team, that the team will perform and collaborate better, right? That's just not how it works. There are distinct things that need to happen at a team level that can't be decided by individuals for themselves. They have to be decided in collaboration with each other in order for the team to be able to function better. So, I mean, yes, there were tons of specific examples there where I just watched people get very enthusiastic about their individual skills and what they were able to do, and then watch their frustration grow as they tried to implement that in collaboration with other people. So you could say, the next thing to do is to work on organizations, but I mean, organizations is almost, that's another level, and that's a huge step in complexity. Whereas David and I, we looked at it and we thought we can actually do something quite useful for a team, because teams can make decisions quite quickly and can implement quite quickly. Whereas if you then scale that up to 1,000-person organization or a 10,000-person organization, it becomes very difficult to move.
And a great example would be football or soccer team. You can have highly skilled individuals on that team, but they better know how to play together as a team. And that's a whole different kind of skill set to apply. And I also have to say, I've been teaching this methodology for over 40 years, and invariably people get it. They go, oh my God, I wish everybody around me got this. Life and work would be so much easier. And I never had the bandwidth or had the time to try to figure out how to supply that, how to fill that gap. And when Ed and I were having lunch 4 years ago in Amsterdam, and Ed's in the last decades had more experience than I have with senior teams who have some GTD education, and watching how that affected their culture, and said, we ought to really make this formulaic as opposed to let it be osmotic and ad hoc. So, and I noticed Ed was doing that. I'll toot his horn here. He's just so brilliant at a brilliant management consultant, a huge aficionado of the methodology, and a brilliant writer too. He did a lot of the heavy lifting of the text in the book. So, yay, Ed.
I'm hearing a lot of compliments. Kudos to you, Ed. And also what I'm hearing, I'm reading in between the lines, book number 3, organizational level, because I heard Ed mentioning something regarding to that. So I know that it is indeed a challenge when you are providing a solution on an organizational level. However, you have, embarked this challenge with the team. So maybe in the future, there might be an organizational level. But bringing it back to the book, can you share some, maybe 3 key differences between applying it to the GTD, applying the GTD principles to the individual, and applying it to the teams? Or maybe Ed, you do teams, and then David does the individual part. Does that help?
No, it doesn't help.
Then bring it on.
Because the examples, if you look at what's relevant for an individual, and the example will kind of explain why there's a necessity to talk about team in a different way. So if you look at what David did, and if I get to pass the ball back in terms of compliments, on one level, this book would never have existed without David's initial work, because I was out there, I was a smart, motivated kid who was just frying energy, because I didn't have any, well, I had a system, it just wasn't a good system. And and David articulated a personal productivity system that allowed me to increase my productivity by, it wasn't dozens of percent, it was hundreds of percent. And that's partially because I was just so bad that there was all kinds of improvement opportunities. Like that's how you could get people hundreds of percent. That's impossible. I said, no, you don't know how bad I was. So that's part of the reason that this book got written. Was David's articulation was just extremely, extremely helpful for me. Changed my life. If we come back to your question, one of the things that David articulated there was like, you need to look at the things that are coming into your world and you need to decide about them. And one of the best ways to do that is to, clear out your inboxes on a daily basis. So go through, think and decide, put the results of your thinking in a place that you trust, and then go to work. And individuals can do that, right? Individuals can make the decisions about, what it is that they're going to do. They can clear out their own inboxes. But what they can't do is decide on who's doing what on the team, so that they're not getting so many emails that don't relate to them, right? So one of the things that a team needs to do is decide who has what roles and make sure that everybody understands who's doing what. So you don't just end up spamming the entire team with your questions. You ask your questions of a specific person. So you can start to take people's email volume from 250 a day down to 150 or 50 a day.
That's a main problem right now in the workplace, where everybody's being sent into the CC or the by CC and being hijacked by email that wasn't meant for them.
Exactly.
I think another
that's a specific example of at the individual level, you can take care of your own inbox, but it's at the team level that you can start to make sure that inbox is in fact manageable. Yeah.
And one of the things we unpacked that's a little different. I mean, it's true that individuals need to focus on their purpose about life and also their principles and their standards and have some level of clarity and organization for themselves. But when a team does that, I think we spent 2 chapters, Ed, on standards and principles, because that is one huge improvement opportunity for teams. How do we play together? What are our rules of engagement? And nobody wants to be too constricted about that, but there are some real principles about that need to be brought to bear for a lot of teams in terms of how late can meetings start, how clear are meetings in terms of their purpose, how clear are people in terms of next action decisions that are making, how clear are they in terms of roles. That's another huge improvement opportunity for teams. Who's doing what? The old saying is, when 2 or more are responsible, nobody is. So, that kind of clarity oftentimes requires conversations, it requires decisions, it requires collaboration and consensus on a team level that individuals don't have to do with them. Yeah, they need to sort of do it with themselves, but for the most part, it's pretty much assumed.
Yeah.
So that clarification is a real critical piece in working in a team situation. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How has the post-pandemic work environment influenced the need for team-based productivity strategies? Have you noticed things that have changed, the hybrid, remote?
I was just designing a presentation I was doing about somebody, and they've asked me, David, a key topic is what's changed in the workplace, both digitally and with post-pandemic and so forth. What's different? And I got a few things that are different. First of all, global work is global. Second, it's virtual. Third is a lot more people are working for projects, not for companies. So the individual contracted people, have their own businesses and their own work. That's growing tremendously as a vector. And one of the things that's new is how frequently things are. Coming our parents, how often did they need to change their lifestyle and their careers and all those decisions? And now what's new these days is how frequently things are new, how frequently things are changing. And that change requires people to really step up to the plate a whole lot more than they used to, in terms of how they manage themselves in that world, and also then how the teams are going to work together and clarify standards and clarify how they're going to work together. There's still a lot of juries out for a lot of those companies in terms of, you know, should they come to work twice a week? Should they, you know, is it okay to be totally virtual? You know, et cetera, et cetera. I think a lot of those decisions haven't been finalized yet.
I think
No, that's definite.
The post-pandemic environment, which, you know, you could say the hybrid working environment, the principles that we articulate in the book are basically true for all teams. And I was thinking about this the other day. The thing that's different for hybrid teams is that you probably need to do them more. You need to pay more attention to what these principles are, because with a distributed thing, a distributed team, or geographically distributed, you have to focus much more on how are we doing this together? What is our culture together? And that's, you know, frankly, culture is just a series of small decisions about how we're going to do things together with each other. You need to pay more attention to that and make them more clear rather than leave them kind of amorphous and disparate, because then people aren't close enough to each other to kind of copy each other by watching, right? They need to have that articulated, and ideally sooner rather than later.
And probably stress and repetition as well. Yeah.
So I'm going to bring up a question that does more of a deep dive in the book. And to do that, I will show an image as well so that it's more clear. So the question that I have is, can you share more about the different horizons and explain a little bit more about Horizon 2, the area of focus and accountability? The moment that I saw that chapter, I love the word accountability. So I fell in love just because of the word accountability. Can you share a little bit more? And I made sure that I created, you know, I got a snapshot from the book so that people can see the different focuses and the horizons as well.
Good.
Well,
David, do you want to have a go?
I originally, you know, sort of, I didn't make this up. I recognized the different levels of commitments we have with ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the same is true with the team. The team has commitment to a purpose. It wouldn't be a team that didn't have a purpose to be a team.
Mm-hmm.
It has a commitment to its principles and its standards about how they play together. It has a commitment to where it's going, and while success, that's vision. That's another level of commitment that it has. There's another level of commitment of what are the goals and objectives that have to be achieved so that the vision actually happens. That would be more like annual planning, budgeting, strategic thinking, and whatever. And then areas of focus is it's who's got what role.
Mm-hmm.
In the organization and in the companies. And so that's another area. And then projects, what are all the things that you're going to take more than one action to complete that you can finish within the next few weeks or months? Most individuals have between 30 and 100 of those. Every team is probably different in terms of how many projects that team actually has. Could be 6 if they're huge, it could be 25, could be 100, mm-hmm. Who knows? But that's another level of commitment, is to get all those things finished. And then you have the level of commitment, which are all the actions that need to be taken. That's the ground level. Emails to send, conversations to have, et cetera. So there's a very different set of content with each one of these levels of commitment. But we've all got them. Whether you're conscious of them or not is another question. Mm-hmm. Right? But you know how you're operating, you're already operating with areas of focus. You already are operating with projects. You already have, you know, probably some level of goal, some level of where you want to be in your life 5 years from now in terms of a vision. And you got something that's probably driving, you know, what you consider really, really important in terms of purpose and your principles. Mm-hmm. So everybody has these. Very few people are that conscious about all of them. And years ago, people asked me, David, how do I set priorities? You know, they get their head empty, they get organized, and then they'd have 100 things on the list. And said, oh my God, how do I decide priorities? And I'm just scratching my head, called beats me. And then it took a while for me to, and in a lot of my coaching, to just discover that these were different levels that people had different answers to. And if you really want to know your priorities, just, you know, line all these up. Make sure your actions are finishing projects that are coming from your areas of focus, that are coming from the goals that you have, that are coming from the vision that you want to produce and are coming that are on purpose, and how you're playing, the game. So again, I didn't make these up. I just recognized them and objectified them, and they have become extremely valuable in both my coaching and I think Ed's too, in terms of working with these. So it's been very functional.
We kind of go back to where we started, right? This is the reason that teams need to pay more attention to this, even than like individuals need to do this. And if they don't, they will be a little bit less productive than they could be, a little bit less motivated than they could be. But if a team doesn't get clarify what these things are for themselves together, then you have energy pointing in different directions. You have people competing to do certain things. So these things become even more important as you go up to the team level. So this idea of clarity, which Mary Jane brought in or underlined, is one of the 5 principles that we had in terms of what teams actually have to do in order to perform at the highest level. And one of those, to get to your question here, is make sure that people are really clear on who's doing what. So you don't have double work, you don't have over communication, you don't have all that stuff happening.
I love
that some areas neglected because there is no focus on it. Yeah. Thank you. So how can leaders effectively foster, all right, a culture of healthy high performance within their teams? I mean, I just, and I was sharing this prior to us getting started, that a recent Gallup, some data that came in, 23%, and Vivian, you've got it here on the screen, strongly agree that they trust the leadership of their organization. And then there was another piece of data that 22% strongly agree that they're motivated to perform outstandingly to the best of their abilities. When you've got these kind of numbers, obviously these are not effective. There's not a lot of effective teamwork going on. So how can leaders do it better?
I think a lot of leaders just neglect implementation. And I think Ed wrote really well about that in the book, that they may have charisma, they may have a type A personality, they may have strong ego, they may have vision about what to do, but then they fumble or don't even play with how do I get the team to make all this happen. And so they don't do that. And we use, I think in the book, a great analogy of the gardener, that a real leader is a gardener and is trying to get the plants to grow and make sure the plants are in the right place, make sure they have fertilizer, and make sure they get enough water, and make sure that the process of growing is facilitated. And so, there's a graveyard of companies out there that were run by charismatic leaders that just didn't know how to implement.
I love your words, your use of words. Thank you for sharing that.
So implementation, and they have to know what to implement. And this is where the book, I think, can really help guide them in the areas that they need to focus on to implement. Yeah.
I mean, the fast answer to your question is they could just buy our book. And
exactly.
That's a more direct way of saying it, Ed.
And read it. And we really hope that we've done 2 things with the book. One is to write a bit of a manifesto for a new way of working, a better way of working. Because this idea of healthy high performance is in many ways a much more challenging standard than just healthy or just high performance, right? There's lots of high performance teams and individuals out there that are headed for burnout, for instance, right? And then there's lots of people who are, doing yoga classes day in and day out, but getting nothing done. So it's actually much more challenging to bring those 2 things together. And to come back to the gardening metaphor, I think for leaders to realize that not all of this stuff is sexy, but some of it is extremely effective. Getting in there, getting your hands dirty, and doing stuff that doesn't feel like it's going to get you on the cover of, Forbes or Time magazine for your accomplishments as a visionary leader, but it's the stuff that people need from you as a leader in order to be able to do their work. And it was just before the call, I was thinking about this in a completely different context, but I realized that if you take any of the great artists in history, right, a very small fraction of what they did was have a great idea for the picture they wanted to paint or the sculpture that they wanted to chisel away on, right? That's a very small fraction of their work. The biggest part of their work is the craftsmanship of knowing how to use a paintbrush, knowing how to use a hammer and a chisel in an expert way in order to make that thing happen. And those things take years to develop. It's not like you wake up and you know how to paint like Rembrandt, right? You need years to develop those skills. And I would say, to develop these skills of personal workflow, we think it's probably going to take you something like 2 years to get really good. And as a leader and a manager, you're going to need time to learn these things so that you can have a great idea and you have built the skills in your team and the collaborative ability in your team so that they can actually get it done.
And one of the things that will reduce trust, if not eliminate it totally, is a leader or manager that doesn't model the behavior they're expecting of their team. They're expecting people to keep track of their agreements and meetings, and they don't. What happens to trust? It isn't, no. Right? So, there are scores of examples of things that leaders could do that would very much improve people's ability to trust what they're doing, what they're saying. I mean, you guys are experts in communication. Come on, when does a boss sit down with his or her secretary or assistant and have a conversation? How are we doing? How are we working together? How could we improve? That's going to build trust, especially if they actually do that.
and listen and be curious in that conversation. Sure. Yeah. And it's not something do it all immediately in order to be successful. What I'm hearing is that it is Ed, you kind of painted that picture. It is a craft, a skill that's crafted over years. So you can build on each individual element as one improves and adding in another element to the puzzle, I guess.
And another thing that we focus on in terms of healthy is the team sustainable and is it repeatable? Because these days, who's now on my team? Oh my God, I had 3 people leave and I got 4 more people on the team. Whoops. How can I then make sure that I can recreate what made us maybe successful before? Because I now have the manifesto about the things that need to happen, as opposed to ad hoc or it just happened by accident. So, and is it sustainable? Can you keep that team healthy, and not burn everybody out, in the process? So sustainability and repeatability, I think, are core elements of team health.
You're putting out a valuable challenge that a lot of leaders are dealing right now at the moment, or many organizations are dealing right now, is that when they have their new talent, how are they going to keep their talent? But also when the talent leaves, how are you going to create a sustainable environment for those who are left behind? Which brings me to the following question.
If I can just add one thing in, Vivian, just add one thing in. The other thing that came to mind as you were sharing this, David, is that it's also the critical factor in a lot of offices now, when people are in the office, that they are separated. I had one manager who said to me, I don't even know everybody who's on my team because they're scattered throughout the building. They're not even working together within the same location. So I just throw that out as an example of how much attention needs to be paid to
And I'm thinking about
bringing teams
Horizon
together.
2. I'm thinking about Horizon 2, what both of the gentlemen have shared right now with the focus and people not knowing what to do, but also creating that connection. But I'm also curious about each one of you mentioned one challenge where a challenge that a team would face when it comes to adopting the GTD principles, and how can they overcome them? Just one challenge. Who's going to go first?
Well, the first challenge is step one of team and individual productivity, which is capturing what has the team's attention. If they don't do that, then you get what I refer to as urinalysis. You know, people are in the bathroom going, you don't know, but they're yada, yada, yada. And there's all kinds of issues and all kinds of things going on that people aren't willing to put on the table.
Yeah.
Either because they don't trust the team, they don't trust that they'll be trusted by saying something that might be unpopular, or it might be a challenge that they have to address. But just the capturing step, I mean, that's just a step one. Then you have to decide what to do with what you capture. But if you haven't captured it all, it's like personally, if you haven't captured everything that got your attention, you don't trust your list, you don't trust your system, and the system will feel like too much work. So it'll fall off the GTD wagon pretty fast. If it's not kept current, it's not reflected on a regular basis and kept current, you know, with the new stuff that needs to be dealt with. And if you don't pay attention to what has your attention, you know, if you don't pay attention to what has your attention, it'll take more of your attention than it deserves. And unfortunately, that's subterranean with a lot of teams, as opposed to in the light of day, let's put it all up on a whiteboard, guys. Everything that's got our attention as a team. That's a very powerful exercise.
The fact that you're mentioning reflection, because too often I see this in so many occasions that people don't take the time to reflect. They move on to the next and on to the next and on to the next, and not learn from what went well, what should I stop, and what should I continue, so that you can use that for future references as well. You want to share your take on this question?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of builds on what David said, because I think we do an entire chapter, and I think it's the longest chapter in the book, on prioritization. And you could reframe that and just call it the ability to say no. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that's out there, because in my experience of working with teams, senior and not so senior, is that most of them are kind of paralyzed by the amount of work they think they have on. And so they get very busy with detail rather than staying focused on strategic things that they've decided to do. So when they decide something new, it just gets thrown onto an ever larger pile that they haven't actually identified what's in the pile. They just know it's a very big pile. Everybody's a bit freaked out by that, and that saps their energy. And one of the things that we're trying to get people to do is to, you know, review, reflect, and deprioritize a whole bunch of stuff that they think they should be doing, that might relate to projects that got started 6 months ago or 9 months ago. But in light of what we decided in this meeting, what do we need to let go of? Now, this is, it's not rocket science, but people don't do it. And the resulting overwhelm turns into a form of paralysis and or despair. When someone says, we need to do X, which is new, they just go, yeah, but we've got this thing, we're not getting any of that done. So I'm just going to put that over here and get on with, you know, handling the detail in my life rather than thinking strategically and acting strategically as a team.
And this craft all works very interchangeably, because if a team doesn't know how many projects it has and what those projects are, they will always overcommit. Just like you as an individual, if you don't know if you're not doing weekly reviews and keeping your project list current and alive and well, you'll always overcommit. Never seen an exception to that. And the same is true with the team. So just being the capturing, clarifying, and organizing aspect of the team behaviors that we describe in the book, that all works together to get to that place where it's a lot easier to say no, because now you know what you're not doing and you know what you should be doing. But see, your head's a terrible office, and most people are trying to, you know, manage their life in their head. And the same is true with the team.
Mind
we need
like
a book
water,
of quotes.
David.
We need a book of quotes. We need a book of quotes. Yes, go on, Mary Jane.
No, I was just saying, David has a quote that I love, is mind like water, and he's just described why that most often doesn't happen. So we're in a data world. How do teams measure the success when they're implementing elements of GTD?
It's a big challenge. I generally am asking teams before we start to do anything with them is to work out what it is that they're trying to do, because otherwise we can't work out whether we've been successful in doing it. And the automatic temptation is to make up a whole bunch of things that then add work. And generally my suggestion is, well, what are you already measuring? And are those things that you care about enough, and can we affect those? And we can look at the, whatever they're already measuring and decide whether our work will help with those measures or not, or whether we need to introduce something new. But by and large, if they're already measuring it, they're much more likely to continue measuring it, and they don't have to do any new and extra work. The other part of that exercise is very often we find they're measuring things they don't need to measure anymore. They're writing reports that they needed 2 or 3 years ago, but no one's looking at anymore, so they can stop doing a whole bunch of stuff. So yeah, it's basically, that's a consultation with the team itself. What do you want to know you're doing better?
And a lot of this, it just has to be anecdotal. Kind of very difficult to put numbers on stuff that, well, for instance, you could put a number on how many people are off work because of stress, right? And Ed's got great examples of how expensive that is in Europe, particularly right now. And I read not long ago that 20% of the workforce of the Netherlands is out of work because of stress. So that is something you could measure, or turnover, on a team. You can measure those kinds of things. But other than that, I'd say success is whether the team is enjoying going to its meetings.
Are they thriving?
Yeah.
Also, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, which brings me, while you were talking, which brings me also that a need to share this perspective. So this is a study done by Gallup, which a research that they shared last year, that only 23% globally is thriving in the workplace. And the figure is even more devastating when you look into Europe, where only 13% of the people are thriving. So I see a huge need for GTD being activated within so many teams, that there's more to be done and more to be done when it comes to engaging the people, but also making sure that they don't leave the company too early, because nowadays you're lucky when you have new talent coming in and staying for at least 1.5 years, right? So you've invested in them, got them up to speed 1.5 years, and then they leave. That's a huge disinvestment as well. And I want to make sure that the next question is also being done by Mary Jane. So Mary Jane, can you ask the other question?
Yeah, so this is about how improved communication through GTD principles can reduce stress among team members. And did you lose me?
No, we got you.
No, okay.
I got you. If we go back to the slide on engagement, so the thriving at work thing, there you go. So this is, I think, is from the Gallup. They're engaged.
State of the global workplace. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a measure of engagement, and we use the figures from 2022, I believe, in the book, and interestingly, the figure for thriving at work in Europe has gone down in 2023. So it was 14%, and now it's 13% in 2023. I think the lowest there was France, which is at 10%. And the highest is in the States at least in 2022. And I think there it was about 33% in the States, right? So that was the highest globally. It is one of the reasons that we wrote the book, because part of the reasons that people are so disengaged is that it's so hard to go to work. And to come back to your question, Mary Jane, about communication, we looked at these 5 principles of great teams. One of them was creating massive clarity around all kinds of different things on the team. The other was having sufficient trust. The other was clear communication. The next one was basically learning. So coming back to something that you said earlier. And then the final one is diversity. Whatever it is in all of these things that we've written in the book, most of them in some way are enablers of better communication. And better communication will lead to, if it's spicy communication, perhaps a short-term.
So courageous communication, is that what you were referring? Spicy? Okay.
Courageous, there you go. If it's addressing things that are uncomfortable, that might raise short-term stress levels. But longer term, if it's getting stuff on the table that needs to be clarified in order for the team to learn, to develop sufficient trust, then it's longer term going to be better for the health of the team.
And I hate to sound a little cranky here, but you don't have to like people that you can work together with very successfully. No, you don't. But you do need to have clear agreements. You need to have clear communication. Our dogs have dogs they don't like. That's fine. You don't have to go like everybody in order to do good work, but you need to define the work appropriately and make sure that people are holding the appropriate standards. So that automatically builds. People love to get stuff done. They actually love to be successful at work. They love to actually work with other people, even if they don't necessarily like them personally or go have dinner with them. But in order to, they're getting stuff done together as a team, they're thriving. That's really it. And to that point too, before we close, I want to make a point too that Ed and I made sure this book is a total manual as far as we're concerned about all the best practices. Many teams don't need all that. Many teams can just say, "Oh, let's snack on this piece." Or here's one of those things. I think Mary Jane, you may have mentioned it earlier. It's like let's just take a piece of this. Let's take this piece and see what we can do with it. And so we really wrote it that way so that it's an evergreen manual. I think we did a pretty good job, so that when we fly to Jupiter in 2090, this will still be a good book, and very effective.
Awesome. Are we allowed to ask 2 more questions? Is that still possible in the Getting Things Done calendar? So I want to ask, Mary Jane, you can pick and choose whatever question you would like to ask. I really want to ask this question: how important is leadership buy-in for successful adaptation of team productivity strategies?
I think it's critical. Distinct from the original principles that David articulated, which was individual productivity. And there, it's helpful if the person above you is engaged and is doing the same thing, but it's not actually imperative. So I, as an individual, can dramatically increase my productivity and reduce my stress levels by simply, being a better player myself. When we move to the level of the team, you can get all the players individually better, but unless the leadership is signing off on the collaboration aspects, then I think you will have much more difficulty to move forwards. So that's not to say that you can't make progress. I think if someone is reading the book and they're looking at their team and they're going, wow, there's all kinds of things that we need to do here. And they don't feel like they have the ear of their boss, or their boss is, frankly, a charismatic idiot who doesn't know how to manage or lead, but has been appointed, and so they got to live with it. It makes it more difficult, but I think you could still pull people together and say, hey, I think if we just focus on this aspect right here, that's the biggest lever for us in terms of how we function as a team. And whether, sometimes you need the boss's authority to do that, and sometimes you can just agree amongst each other. This is how we want to do it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
And I think that answers actually one of the questions on what advice would you give to teams starting their journey with GTD principles. And David, you mentioned snacking on one piece, and Ed, you just also shared. Find that one thing that everybody agrees this is something that we could focus on, and then do it.
I think one of the biggest challenges that people are facing, and this is not related just to our book or to GTD, or I think one of the biggest things that I've encountered as a consultant and teacher is that people very often have fallen into despair about their own ability to change. I think there are a variety of reasons for that. I think a lot of it is related to their inability to, for instance, change when they decide they want to lose weight, and they discover they're living in a food environment that doesn't support that, and they just can't. And so when they're presented with something new, they go, well, I'd love to, but I need discipline for that, and I clearly don't have discipline because I've decided for every January 1st for the last 15 years that I want to do something, and I can't do it, so I can't do this either. And I think that's a place where you need to really make the steps small enough, and make sure that you don't overwhelm yourself with too much work as an individual, but certainly as a team. Make sure that you're picking off low-hanging fruit on the team where you can make quick and easy changes that make a difference before you go back and get some more, and before you go back and get some more. Trying to change everything all at once is basically a recipe for more despair.
That's also another reason why I love Horizon number 2, because there is an accountability part where I can see teams supporting each other and holding each other accountable as well.
And, this is just sort of my personal take on it. I don't like the word discipline. It sounds too hard. It sounds like too much sweat. I prefer to use the word direction. Because if you think this is just going to give us a different direction to move in, then you don't have to go make transformational change to make a big difference. You say, let's just direct how we're going to manage our meetings now. Let's just direct ourselves to make sure we're, et cetera. So I think the book is full of a lot of good direction.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Do you want to close out, Mary Jane?
I just want to say a huge thank you to you both. Really, if the listeners to this recording, I really do believe that they're going to have a clear idea of why they need to buy this book and start implementing. There is so much need. And I'm going to go back to the word because it sticks with me, for clarification and communication. I'll use them both within teams in order to enhance performance. And you guys have painted the picture and you've created the strategy. So it's just a matter of someone picking it up and running with it.
Yeah.
You've got the playbook, as you said.
Thank you so much for this conversation. And I really enjoyed the deep dive of the book. So thank you again.
Wonderful.
You're welcome. Thanks for the invitation.
And everybody, if you have any questions, know that you can still share them. I'll make sure by the end of the month, I'll make sure to summarize what's being said, but make sure that you share it with your management, or make sure that you share it with your team, so that you can have a conversation about what can we do and what can we learn from this particular book. So bye, everybody. Until the next time.
Bye.